Chapter 4. The Silent Pain. The school bell dismissing class rang out shrill and loud, cutting off the teacher's last words. Your final grades, and have a happy holiday. But we kids didn't care. We were free. For 2 whole weeks. A couple of desks got overturned in the mad dash for the classroom door, and once we broke out into the halls they cleared within seconds amid loud whoops of celebration and ghetto blasters. Cranked to ear-splitting levels. It was Christmas. Nothing could contain our excitement. Hey, John, I'm getting some good stuff this year. What about you, my friend Junebug shouted. As we pushed through the outside door into the freezing air of the schoolyard. Everybody turned to see what my response would be. My brother, I'm gonna get the bike I always wanted, and my G.I. Joe said, I said boastfully. Then turned around and murmured under my breath, like I'm really gonna get these toys this year. But Mom had said that this year my father was going to cooperate and be part of our Christmas even. Promised it, so I allowed myself a spark of expectation. My brothers and I had a good feeling that, for the first time, we were going to have a good Christmas. Man, Christmas is my favorite holiday, Junebug went on. Christmas at my house is always the best time of year. We always get the very best. My father always does the right thing. Really? Well, at my house we always step it up for the holidays, I lied, falling into the rhythm of things. Hey, you wanna go hang out? You wanna go to the candy store? Nah, man, I gotta get home. My brothers and I are gonna help my mother put up the lights on the window and decorate the Christmas tree. My dad's supposed to bring home a tree today. We talked on as we headed down the block toward our apartment building, our feet crunching over clods of icy snow stained brown from the street sludge. People jostled along the streets with the ever-present noise of traffic and police sirens in the background. New snow started to fall as we walked, covering the dingy Bronx neighborhood in a fragile coat of white. In spite of myself, I really did feel hopeful about Christmas this year. When I burst through the door of our apartment, there was the Christmas tree, still bound with twine and leaning in a corner of our tiny living room. Mommy came in from the kitchen smiling. Guess what we get to do tonight, John, she said, her eyes sparkling. Did Poppy bring the tree? It sure is a good one, I said, admiring the spindly balsam fir, my voice loud with excitement. But Dad brought it, right? Just like he said he would. My mother's eyes flickered. Of course he wanted to, but Poppy was very busy with his taxi service today, so your Uncle Alberto brought it instead. It is a good tree, isn't it? We'll decorate it with lights and ornaments and make it real pretty for Christmas morning. Your father promised to be here this year. Remember how I told you that? It's going to be a good Christmas, you'll see. A twinge of disappointment bit at my insides, but I pushed it away, determined to be happy for my mother. Later that night we hauled the box of ornaments and lights down from the closet shelf. My brothers and I transformed that plain-looking tree into a real Christmas tree. In our childish glee we didn't notice how few ornaments and lights there really were. To us, it was the most beautiful Christmas tree we'd ever seen. I imagined waking up Christmas morning, running down the hall into the living room, and finding gifts piled underneath the branches, just like they did in the movies. After all, he had promised this year. The days leading up to Christmas passed quickly, and suddenly it was Christmas Eve. After I helped clear the dishes away from the dinner table, I went over and stood beside my mom as she scraped leftovers into a container. "What time is Dad coming home tonight?" I gazed at her face and watched for her reaction. She paused a second too long. "Oh, I'm not sure, but he'll be here for Christmas morning." She smiled at me and placed the container in the refrigerator. "He's bringing the gifts he promised. You and your brothers are gonna have your toys to play with in the morning." "Okay," I said, mustering a feeble smile. That night I leaned out the window of my bedroom and looked up at the stars, praying to the only God I'd ever known, the Indian spirit who gave me my protective necklace. "Tawada, please let my dad come home for Christmas like he said he would." I fingered the necklace around my throat and squeezed my eyes shut. For once, let him show up. Home for the holidays. The grayish light of dawn peeked through the cracks around the window blind, signaling the start of a new day. My groggy mind took only half a second to register. Christmas. I kicked back the covers to awaken my brothers. We tore down the hallway and spilled into the living room. Santa came. He came, he came. Julio shouted, jumping up and down and diving under the tree to look at the 5 gifts lying there. George and Eustaquio tumbled in after him. I didn't want to spoil the whole Santa thing for my younger brothers, so I played along, my own heart thudding with excitement that he came, or rather came through. My father had come home for Christmas and brought presents for his family. "Wait for your dad to come into the living room before you can get your toys," Mom said as she entered the room, tying on her robe. "The toys are there. Grab your toys and don't make a mess," Dad's booming voice called from the living room doorway. "And make sure you clean up after yourself." He spoke with coldness and a pretend smile on his face. "Merry Christmas, boys," Mom said as she bent down to kiss each of us on the cheek. "I'm gonna start breakfast." My father settled himself on the couch and popped open a beer breakfast in a can, as one of the older boys in the neighborhood called it. He ordered my little brothers to hold off on the gifts until he passed each one of us the present with our name on it. I knew he wanted to do the father thing, and that was cool. It was good to see him home with us for once after so many Christmases when he was an absentee dad. "Here you go, John." My father handed me a small gift wrapped in Christmas paper. It was too small to be a G.I. Joe, but I didn't care. I started to open the present and glanced up at Mom in the kitchen. She smiled back at me from the stove, where the smell of eggs frying wafted out into the living room. My fingers struggled to tear open the gift, it was taped so much. "Here, stupid, let me do it," my father said, snatching the gift out of my hands. "What kind of a kid can't even open his own Christmas present?" "Aye. He made a hand gesture as if to slap me. My heart, so full of joy at seeing my family all together on this special day, sank into the pit of my stomach. With his cruel, sarcastic comment, my father had killed whatever Christmas spirit resided in the Ramirez household. I don't even remember what my present was that Christmas morning, some trinket my father picked up at Cheap Charlie's store, but it didn't matter. In that one instant of cruelty he had spoiled it all. A few days after Christmas, my father long gone from our lives again, I was heading down the apartment stairwell when I spotted 2 brand new G.I. Joes lying on a step. One of the neighbor boys Must have been playing with his new Christmas toys and got called inside for supper. I scooped up the action figures and tucked them under my shirt, then made a dash for my aunt's house where I could play with them unseen. These were coveted toys, and I was so desperate to have a G.I. Joe at any cost. To feel like a regular boy that I pushed away the nagging thoughts in my conscience that what I'd just done was wrong. When the neighbor boy asked me if I'd seen his action figures a few days later, I lied and said no. Once again my conscience bothered me, and I felt the burning guilt of my crime, but I never confessed to it. Even though Mom had taught us carefully not to lie or steal, at that moment I didn't care about the penalty I would pay or the beating I would receive if my mother ever found out. The false penitent. The years churned on, with my father in and out of our lives and startling changes happening in my own body. Suddenly my voice lowered to a new octave and I developed muscles that hadn't been there before. The reflection in the bathroom mirror showed a young man with new dark hair growth on his chin and upper lip. By the time I turned 13, my experience in Santeria had reached new levels. I was learning how to control spirits to make them do my bidding, and visitors to the centros often sought me out for readings, recognizing the special gifting upon me to tell fortunes and break spells with complete accuracy. Yet for all my advancement in the world of witchcraft, I was still a boy craving the love of a father, an earthly father I had given up on. Though my dad was rarely home, word of his escapades drifted back to us, twisting the knife in my gut with every fresh story. One evening he was hanging out with some friends at his buddy Manuel's house, drinking it up and listening to music. At some point late that night, after the others left, he and Manuel got into a disagreement about who was a better man. Back and forth they compared themselves, regarding women and money and who drove the better car. As the argument escalated, suddenly my father jumped out of his seat and grabbed Manuel by the throat, choking the life out of him. Turning blue, in self-defense Manuel reached into his back pocket, grabbed an 8-inch knife, and plunged it into my father's stomach. My dad fell to the ground. Manuel called 911 and told the police my father came to the house looking for a fight, and he was forced to stab him in self-defense. An ambulance carted my father off to the hospital. I never witnessed my dad getting in a fight. What he did in the street, he did in the street. But as time went on, he got even worse. He drank, mouthed off, and got into heated arguments that ended up in a lot of street brawls. Sometimes he was beat up badly and had to go to the hospital again. When we visited him, he made profuse promises to my mother that he was going to be a changed man. He announced dramatically, almost pitifully gasping and wheezing because of his injuries, that he was going to stop drinking and playing around with other women. It almost seemed like he was repentant. And we all wanted so much to believe him. Esther, oh Esther, please forgive me. Give me another chance, he would cough and plead in a ragged breath while holding onto my mother's hand. My brothers and I stood awkwardly to the side of his white hospital bed, watching the embarrassing scene. Once he even kissed her hand and double-kissed her wedding ring. I will make it up to you, he swore as a tear slid down the stubble on his cheek. It was the only time I ever saw any real tenderness from him. Deep inside I suspected his actions were prompted by being in the hospital and afraid to die, not out of any real love and concern for my mother. Because when he got better and the fire was back in his belly, as soon as his wounds healed. You could see his eyes dancing with plans, even from his hospital bed. It was during those times, closest to his being released, that my father's remorseful behavior switched right in front of our eyes. He'd be sitting up in bed now, hair combed and gleaming with dressing oil, his face freshly shaved and cologne liberally applied. He was glorying in all the attention. At this point, he certainly didn't look sick or injured to me. I turned away, hiding my tears. As I stared out the hospital window. Once discharged from the hospital, of course nothing changed. If anything, my father's drinking and hanging out became even more of his 24/7 obsession. There is a saying that every dog has his day, and it's sad that it applied to my own father, but at this point his carousing had reached a fever pitch, one that was compelled to satisfy his most rabid carnal instincts no matter how it hurt everybody near and dear to him. Farewell, my father. One night my father was out with a drinking buddy at his favorite social club. Every poor neighborhood had a club like this one, an adult hangout where the liquor flowed and infidelities flourished. Details of that night only filtered back to me later, but the story goes that he was having a good old time with a barmaid, one of his many mistresses. As she served him his drinks, they flirted back and forth, with whispers, giggles, and cute talk. Apparently they had been lovers for a while, and my father lavished time, money, and attention on this good-time girl who had become one of his special girlfriends. Witnesses said she was wearing a low-cut top, skin-tight skirt, and fishnet stockings. She had been dancing around drunkenly, tottering on high heels, just a half hour before my dad entered the club. While they flirted and laughed, a man entered the club, a stranger to my father, who turned livid and purple when he recognized the woman my father canoodled with. As the stranger watched them flirt back and forth throughout the night, he became enraged. He started to pick a fight with my father's friend. Noticing the confrontation, the great Eustaquio jumped up from his seat to shout at the stranger and defend his friend. My father no doubt planned to just intimidate the stranger with the evil eye or a bare-knuckled defense if necessary. At the worst he would endure another ambulance to hospital stay, but either way he ultimately would be the barmaid's hero and resume their relationship. The angry stranger had something final in mind. Without warning, in the middle of that escalating argument, he pulled out a piece of gray heavy metal from his black leather jacket. Unblinking, the stranger pulled the trigger and blasted a fiery gunshot into my shocked father's face. The bullet driving into his brain just above the eyebrow, killing him instantly. Pandemonium broke out in the bar, and the gunman fled into the night on foot and disappeared. That night in our apartment, we heard a loud knock at the door as though someone were trying to break it down. As my mother opened the door, one of my father's sisters came in screaming hysterically, "Eustaquio is dead. He just got shot. He's dead." Since I was the oldest, my mother grabbed me and we ran to the social club a block away. That night it rained like I had never seen before in a very mysterious way. It seemed as if heaven was crying and the sky was mourning. The raindrops fell heavy and hard like 50-cent coins dropping from the sky. It rained non-stop. My mother and I stood in front of the social club wet and cold as my dad's body lay inside the smoke-filled room. As I watched the throng of policemen and curious onlookers surrounding the whole area, I asked myself why God was crying. Was it because my father Lost his chance to go to heaven? I stood there, shivering from more than the cold rain, and tried to make the tears come, but my eyes and heart were empty.